Good evening, everyone. I am Barry Halverson, co-chair of the Lake Lawrence Lake Management District and Washington State Lake Management District Coordinator. This presentation is targeted to provide information on products that are intended to sequester or mitigate the harmful algal blooms or cyanobacteria problems many of us are experiencing in our lakes. Here are a few rules we'll be following tonight. Our presenter tonight will be Ryan Van Gotham, luminologist and project lead for EutroPHIX, who will be talking to us about EutroSORB G and EutroSORB SI. Ryan, you should be able to share your screen now. Thank you for coming and addressing our many interested lake managers.
I'll be looking a little bit off to the side on my second monitor through this, but yeah, thanks for your time. I'm a limnologist project lead. I do a lot of work in Washington, Idaho, and in the western U.S., but I'm out of Spokane, so not too far away, and have been engaged in working on lakes out here for the last couple of years, and have learned a lot about the particulars of a lot of these lakes. So a good knowledge resource for you guys if you have questions. So I work from EutroPHIX, and this is a division of SePRO Corporation, and we kind of assembled this division in 2020, kind of due to the rising need for harmful algae bloom mitigation, water quality restoration needs across the country, and people focus directly on that to help lake associations and regulators, consultants, and lake managers address these issues. But SePRO's got a long history of working in the environmental space for lake and reservoir management, and we've got a dedicated research facility in North Carolina, which is in this picture here, where we've got, as you can see, a bunch of mesocosm ponds where we can test lots of different technologies and do studies. And we also have a water and diagnostics lab there where we utilize for a lot of our programs. So the team I work with, we're really a strong technical resource team, doing a lot of things at technical support, helping folks assess their water quality, develop these mitigation programs, and then work with partners for implementation. And then permitting and monitoring, heavily engaged there. I've been engaged with Department of Ecology pretty strongly this past year to get what you're going to hear about today, EutroSORB SI, on the permit that's going to get reissued this year, and then outreach and education. And we're all here because we're working on finding ways to improve the water quality of Lake Lawrence. And one of the key things that's being looked at is phosphorus mitigation. And this is, it's a very strong tool. And this is visually what it can do, taking, green water and turning it blue. And so the presentation here is going to cover phosphorus and lanthanum, why it's important and how it's bound up. EutroSORB G, EutroSORB SI, and cost considerations, case studies, and then some specific recommendations for Lake Lawrence. So phosphorus has a strong impact on water quality and productivity of a lake because it's often the limiting or co-limiting nutrient in freshwater systems. 1 pound of phosphorus can grow up to 500 pounds of algae. And so it's very, very critical to manage. And when there's too much phosphorus and nutrients in a lake, it goes from a clear, nice blue state to what we call a EutroPHIX state, which is bright green, lots of productivity. And by doing phosphorus mitigation, you can bind up those nutrients or remove them and turn back the clock and improve water quality. It occurs over a very wide pH range of 4 to 10. Which is a pretty wide range considering lakes are usually about 5 to 8 or 6 to 9 in their pH, and then also in oxic and anoxic conditions. So it doesn't matter if there's lots of oxygen or there's been a loss of oxygen in the lake. near the lake bottom. And when it's applied, it doesn't change the water pH, the alkalinity, the dissolved oxygen. It doesn't impact the water column of the lake when you're applying it that you need to be worried about. And then because the bond is so strong that it creates, this isn't going to release once it's bound, and it's going to be there permanently bound up, and that mass of phosphorus isn't going to cause an issue for you in the future. And so the two products that we utilize for binding phosphorus and doing these lake restoration projects, the first one is EutroSORB G, and this is a lanthanum modified bentonite, and this contains 10% lanthanum. And then the second product, which is a bit newer, is what we call iron-coated lanthanum, as EutroSORB SI, and this currently is in a liquid formulation, which we commercialized and brought to the market in 2024 with additional research before then. And then we're also coming out with a dry version of this. And the liquid formulation has a 20% lanthanum content, and the dry formulation is a bit more concentrated with a 50% lanthanum content. And so these products, EutroSORB G, which is the bentonite clay, both of these are meant for the sediments, but EutroSORB G can do some water column binding as it's being applied, whereas EutroSORB SI is technically inert in the water column. It's not going to bind any phosphorus, and it's only going to do its binding in the sediment. And so for dosing these products of the formulations, about 50 pounds of EutroSORB G will bind 1 pound of phosphorus. And then for EutroSORB SI, for the liquid, it's 2.5 gallons for a pound of phosphorus. And then for the dry formulation, it's 10 pounds of material for 1 pound of phosphorus. And the binding that we expect to see in the sediment, like the equation on the last page, is a 1-to-1 molar binding. We expect in the environment it to be a little inefficient, and we build our dosing rates to account for about a 10% inefficiency, so a 1.1 molar ratio. So here's just a diagram kind of describing that binding process in a little bit more detail. So on the left, we have EutroSORB G, where the product is holding lanthanum in the clay matrix. And this matrix holds onto the lanthanum and prevents its release. And only phosphate is bound to it. It can't bind phosphorus that's in algae or in sediment particles and stuff that are floating around. It can only bind that soluble phosphate form. And then once it gets into the sediment, it still has additional binding capacity. And it's going to integrate into that upper layer of the sediments where most of your sediment releases. And through time, as phosphorus is available, it will bind to the lanthanum in the formulation. And also the clay of it in higher doses can actually help enhance the sediment stability of the lake and kind of fill up those pores and increase the percent solids a little bit. The bentonite clay is sticky. We're not talking, feet or inches of clay, but just a little bit, and it can help enhance the stability. So EutroSORB SI is a little bit different than this. And what this does in the water column, like it says, it's iron-bound lanthanum. And what it is actually a lanthanum mineral that's coated with a protective iron coating. And so it doesn't have an interaction with the water column as it's being applied. So there's no phosphate binding, and it's not going to impact the water column. But once it gets into the sediment, that iron coating releases in anoxic conditions that are very common in your sediments. And then it will activate for binding. And it'll bind in oxic conditions and anoxic conditions once that coating has been released. And so applications are pretty simple. For lakes of your scale, it's usually working on a larger craft with giant tanks and pumps that take the product, if it's a dry formulation, putting it into a slurry, and then using fan jets off the back of the boat to apply it evenly over your application areas. These are some photos from Aquatechnics' applications, I think out at Kitsap Lake. And the liquid version of SI comes in either 2.5 gallon jugs or totes, but that can be mixed up into tanks and directly applied to the surface like this picture or with drop lines. And so once you do the application, everything settles down to the lake sediments and starts to do its work. And it's going to start binding up those mobile forms of phosphorus in the sediment, that the soluble phosphate as it's being released, intercepting that flux so it's not going up to the water column. And through time, that's going to decrease the phosphorus in the lake. This is a chart on the left from Long Lake, pictured here, showing with dosing through time that the phosphorus levels were steadily decreasing as they did more dosing. And then following that, with lower phosphorus levels, the water quality drastically improved in the lake. And these are some pictures from before in 2020, kind of that pre-treatment condition, and then after this was in 2024 during the heat of the summer. And so those outcomes, it's going to get to the sediments, it's going to intercept that release of phosphorus, it's going to permanently bind up mobile phosphorus, reducing that in the sediment and putting it into a permanently bound form. In the lake, you'll start to measure lower phosphorus levels. Generally, there's an improvement in water clarity. And the one thing this product doesn't do is it doesn't bind nitrogen or enhance or change its cycling. And so the benefit of removing phosphorus is you actually increase the nitrogen to phosphorus ratio, which is helpful to keep your green algae, your diatom, your beneficial algae species growing instead of cyanobacteria. And those incorporate better they're better food for the bugs and the fish and support a better food web. And with all these water quality improvements, that's how the reduction of harmful algae blooms and cyanobacteria occur. And so these lanthanum treatments have a very strong record of proven performance. Lanthanum modified bentonite's been applied to hundreds of water bodies worldwide. Lots of small water bodies in the U.S., but also in quite a few lakes. And we recently, in 2024, did the largest lanthanum modified bentonite treatment in North America out on Moses Lake. The chemistry for lanthanum binding is very well researched. There's over 100 peer-reviewed publications, including analyses of how multiple applications have occurred, how strong they've been, and resulting impacts and improvements of those lakes. And I have those citations listed. And then in the U.S. and the work that we've done, we've got quite a few lanthanum modified bentonite or these EutroSORB G projects where we have case studies that we can provide. And then with EutroSORB SI, these case studies are pretty limited at this time. We've got a couple ponds and lakes that we've documented well, but we're going to have a lot more case studies and information available on the response of those treatments, although we expect them to be very similar to between what happens with EutroSORB G and what happens with EutroSORB SI. The treatment results should be very similar, if not the same. So a very beneficial and powerful thing and valuable thing is, these products have undergone, very extensive environmental safety evaluations, which takes into account a lot of information about dosing, what we understand about the biogeochemistry, the differences that water chemistry have, the bioavailability of lanthanum, doing extensive ecotox tests on a whole sort of organisms from your little bugs, different fish, frogs, and mussels, look to understand what lethal doses are and when there's doses where you don't see anything occurring to them in a negative manner, and calculating, how much room of risk, saying, well, if I do an application, it's 100 times less than, anything that's going to impact an aquatic organism. So all these studies have been done and performed by a third party, and available for both of these products. And all the work here is, supportive that there's no risk for, doing these applications for humans, mammals, birds, aquatic organisms. And with these treatments, in the new permit, there is going to be some requirements for monitoring with them. And it's not finalized yet, but I expect the pre-treatment to have some sampling with just a probe of doing vertical profiles. I'm getting a basic set of hardness, alkalinity, and dissolved organic carbon. And then we expect total and filterable lanthanum to need to be sampled from pre-treatment to up to 9 months post-treatment. So those are kind of two samples that need to be collected through time to follow these treatments. And a lot of it is ecology wants some more monitoring data, but these data aren't necessarily, having triggers for feedback. And even if there are some detectable lanthanum, we don't expect there to be any toxicity from that, because the bioavailability is really low of the lanthanum if it's there after treatment. But what we do recommend is, continuing that routine water quality monitoring that you guys do on a monthly basis to track the nutrients in the algae. That's all really good things to see how you're progressing along your treatment plan. We can also utilize satellite data to, track the response in the algae community a lot more frequently than you can go out and grab samples. And we've done this for quite a few lakes. And then also going back and measuring the sediments every 3 to 5 years to validate the response you're getting, the binding that's occurring in the sediments, and tracking your progress towards your treatment plan. So a question that often gets asked with a lot of these treatments, because it's a very big project, and they're very expensive, is, well, how long will good water quality last if I do a treatment? And the very simple answer is, if you just do a tiny amount, if you just treat 1% of the problem, you're probably just going to have a short response time, a few months. Or on the other end of the spectrum, if you did your whole lake dose up front, the literature seems to suggest that about 5 to 10 years for these kind of smaller, shallow lakes. But we believe there's a different approach that gives you a better result, and that's where doing partial dosing through time, whether that's every year a small chunk of the dose, or every 2 years, but you can do that dosing across time, over 10 to 15 years, and then see good water quality throughout that whole process, and really extend the longevity. So your investment goes a lot further towards having good water quality in the lake. And this is informed by a lot of technical studies looking at past alum treatments on the same study, and they've come up with a bunch of factors that really play into that, and that could be looked at in more detail if you would like to dive into that. And so to give you an idea of what this treatment looks like if you're to implement it, so thinking about like a partial treatment, a small dose that you would implement on a yearly basis. So to target 400 pounds of phosphorus, EutroSORB G, that would be 10 pallets of material. The SI liquid, this would be about 4 totes. And then the SI dry would be about 2 pallets. And those pallets are about 2,000 pounds each. And Kyle's gotten his team very good at applying these things. They can get out a pallet in less than an hour, but this is all easily only 1 day of work. And then transferring that up, if you were to treat the whole lake at once, kind of the level of logistics of that would be, for EutroSORB G, 9 semi-truck shipments of product, 182 pallets. For the SI liquid, this is about 5 semi-truck deliveries with 66 totes. And then with the SI dry, this would be about 2 trucks and 36.5 pallets. So a lot different logistics with these, with SI dry being the easiest to get out into the lake. And I think this is a very good visual for you guys to have, because as you're considering other products, like in particular alum, depending on the exact dosing ratio utilized, we could be talking about 60 massive tanker trucks needing to do this same sort of treatment. So it's a very different logistical, set of scale for doing these. And so cost considerations, you guys asked for costs, so I went and ran some rough numbers to put them in here for some planning level costs. And there's not too much difference between these different formulations. Some are like EutroSORB G, I would say, is kind of like the standard, and that'll come out to, when it's all said and done and applied, about $238 per pound of P that you're trying to target. EutroSORB liquid is a more expensive liquid, a little bit less application, so $225 per pound of P sequestered, all the way off to the right end of the table. And then EutroSORB G dry, because it's a very high lanthanum content, it's more expensive than EutroSORB G on the material cost, but when you look at how much phosphorus it's sequestering, that would be the cheapest. And EutroSORB dry isn't available right now, but we hope to have that out, in the next year or two to start getting that applied out in lakes. And so we've got quite a few local case studies available, mostly with EutroSORB G at this point. But the one thing that's really unique is all these have been done with partial dosing strategies, so doing a little bit every year, which is different than what you can find in the peer-reviewed literature. And so I wanted to show one of those examples, Long Lake, to give you a better idea of how these treatments occur and what the results look like in more detail. So Long Lake in Thurston County, it's a very similar, size lake to Lawrence Lake. It has a little bit more flow through, I think about a 2-year residence time instead of a 2 to 4. And it gets, at the south end of the lake is where the water comes in through the wetland and from upstream Pattison Lake, upstream of that. And what this LMD has put together, they did the studies, the internal loading was a big problem here as well. We went out and did an initial investigation of the sediments and quantified how much mobile sediment phosphorus that needed to be targeted with treatments. And they set an annual treatment budget to address these water quality issues through time. And the water quality is steadily improved with partial dosing treatments. The graph on the left is the surface water total phosphorus concentrations. It didn't have a strong response right out of the gate with dosing, but you saw that progressive decrease in the bottom waters, that chart on the right, steadily decreasing down to about an average of 30 micrograms per liter. But, and then in 2024, the average for the surface for the summer got down to 20 micrograms per liter. And they're, we got them down to that point. And then in 2024, they had really great water quality, and they didn't have any harmful algae bloom advisories at that point. Throughout the project, once they started, the algae seemed to be getting less intense through the program, but it was really 2024 where things really kicked off and looked great for them. And here's a chart that I think really helps capture, you should expect to see improvements in the lake. So we started out in 2021, we did a spring light alum treatment followed by a lanthanum modified bentonite treatment. And in that first year, we had about a 50% reduction in the surface and total phosphorus from the historic mean. And then in 2022, we did another, I think, a 12% dose, and got further decreases or improvements in the bottom water phosphorus, and then did more dosing in 2023, and then again in 2024. And once we passed that kind of like 25-30% dose mark, we were getting the high reductions in total phosphorus we were looking for and meeting our water quality goals. So the takeaway here is the faster you kind of get this upfront dosing done on the deep parts of your lake, the sooner that you're going to see the results, get your phosphorus down where you want it to. And then at that point, it's just doing the dosing to maintain it and keep working towards what's in the sediment. And here again, it's just, the night and day difference that, this phosphorus mitigation work has had over on Long Lake with the August 2020 harmful algae bloom in comparison to in August 2024 with much clearer water and no HAB advisories. And so this program was, after the fourth year, we came back and said, the Lake Management District said, hey, we've used both aluminum and lanthanum. We wanted to come back and see what we could learn from the sediments to see which was more efficient and what should we be using more into the future. So we went out and did a sediment core study across the lake. We did 6 sediment cores, and we were able to recalculate the mobile phosphorus that was present in the sediment at that time. And then we were able to use all the samples and look at the lanthanum distributions and how it was binding phosphorus, and determine that it was binding well and as we expected. It was getting very close to that molar ratio, and we were getting consistent recovery across the sites we were looking. But the aluminum that was applied, the binding efficiency was moderate to low based on the literature and use in Washington lakes, and we weren't able to find it at all our sites. It appeared that the aluminum flock settled down to the lake bottom, but after it was applied, it got moved around and redistributed to kind of the deeper parts of the lake, and so those shallower areas that we were needing to treat weren't getting effective treatment. And so Lawrence Lake, I got some slides just to talk about thinking about your lake in more detail and how a program like this might look. And so the West Basin is about 53.3 acres, and if I'm off a slight bit, I apologize. The Big Basin, about 266. Based on the phosphorus budget that Herrera's done, about 50% is due to the sediment release from the deep sediments. But although, you live on the lake and you might think it's a deep lake, in the grand scheme of lakes across the country, this is still a shallow lake. It has a lot of, it doesn't have as much depth to it. Usually once lakes get greater than 30 feet, some of the limnology of the system changes, but there's a lot of interaction with the sediments of this lake to the water column because it's so shallow. And I wasn't able to find alkalinity and DOC or dissolved organic carbon data for the lake, but I'm sure I could find some if I needed to. So I just wanted to highlight the phosphorus budget here, in that there's a large internal load that's being quantified for the lake, and a lot of it's driven from just straight phosphate released from the sediments. That would be great for targeting for treatment to reduce your phosphorus levels in the lake in the summer. And so Based on the data I've seen so far, either product choice of EutroSORB G SI or SI dry would be good choices. Once the dry is available, that would provide the lowest cost in logistics for treatment. But this would be a great candidate for doing this partial annual dosing plan with the budget that your management district can put together. Either the budget you already have, or if you reassess for the budget to increase, and then you can use grants and external funding to do bigger treatments when you can get those grants. But to have the most impact, what you'd want to do is dose the deeper sediments that lose oxygen. So target those areas first. I kind of highlighted them here. I think this was greater than 16 foot in the big basin, and then greater than 10 feet of depth in the western basin. And you'd want to work over about 2 to 5 years to dose those sediments about 50%. I think that would be a good kind of target to try to set. And then once you get those areas treated about 50% of the way, then you can expand your dosing out across a wider area and kind of get on that maintenance schedule to address the rest of the mobile phosphorus in the deep zones, and then the shallow areas over a period of 10 to 20 years. So not trying to do a big treatment all at once up front, but do these progressive treatments through time, see the improvements of water quality, and do it in a way that's financially feasible on an annual basis. And expectations, I think when you get 20 to 30% of this sediment dose applied, you're going to really see the results you want in your lake. And the partial dosing strategy will extend that longevity of the investment you're making. And utilizing adaptive management strategies through this process. So going out after you're doing years of application, keep collecting data, reviewing it, seeing where you need to optimize, tweak some plans. Maybe you need to use, if you're using EutroSORB consistently, maybe there's a year or two where you want to include some alum or something. This doesn't need to be the only tool in the toolbox. And so you can address and optimize and change things as you go along. And so to summarize, everything that I covered is, EutroSORB G are safe, simple, and effective phosphorus binders that you can use in Lawrence Lake. They're well-researched, lots of successful applications, and you've got local expertise from me and from Aquatechnics as implementers and lake management providers on this, and case studies available proving their success. EutroSORB SI would be easier to treat the sediments, and we prefer the dry formulation to do that once it's available. The cost range are pretty manageable for phosphorus mitigation in lakes, about $210 to $240 depending on the technology. And this partial dosing strategy would be an effective approach for you guys. And I do have references to the papers that were included in the presentation. And so on the PDF on the website, you should be able to click most of those links and see the abstracts and stuff for those. But I will take any questions from here.
So now let's open it up for any questions. Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. It was an excellent presentation. Two questions. One is, when do you do these applications? What time of the year?
Yeah, ideally, we target these in the springtime or late spring because the focus of a lot of our programs is preventing that phosphorus release from the sediments. We're trying to time these treatments before that release occurs. So that way the product's already down in the sediment and can grab that phosphorus before it leaks up to the water column.
Good, that makes a lot of sense. And then just the validation of the SI product, why are you still Are you still validating, or you're just in manufacturing or production, or what's the situation there?
Yeah, we've lots of validation. We've had all the environmental studies done on it. We've characterized the chemistry. We've got quite a few field applications out, showing the results of treatments, and I've worked with Ecology to put together the environmental impact review for that product and all the particulars of the chemistry. And so that'll be a document that'll be available in final draft in just the next month or two from Ecology. So it's been very thoroughly studied and described from a chemistry standpoint. Really what we don't have too much of just is just showing the treatment response in a whole number of lakes.
Okay.
So sorry, the corollary to that is in Thurston County, your product G is certified, but this won't have to be certified.
So iron-coated lanthanum in EutroSORB SI, we've been working through the process this past year and this spring. So it's on track to be included on the next permit, which will come out in April. So it'd be available for general use.
Great, thank you.
Terry?
Well, I'm going to ask, because that kind of answered that dry would be available in the spring of this year for use, possibly?
Probably for 27 for the dry.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah.
And then I noticed you gave us the cost of the treatment between $210 and $240 a pound. What is the additional cost for applying it?
That includes application.
Oh, it does include. Okay, cool. Thank you. That I wasn't sure of.
Yeah, so that's a fully implemented treatments and projects.
That's dependent on the contractor that gets the RFP approved to do the application.
Yeah, you will want to make sure that the costs you're getting are everyone's being compared apples to apples, which I think Barry set up a good spreadsheet to do.
Yeah, that's exactly what we intend to do. Frank, you're up.
Can you comment a little bit on liquid versus the dry when it comes to water loss in the lake, water gain and water loss? In other words, are these equations that I'm looking at right now, those apply to either of the two lanthanide applications?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those products, when they're applied, they're quite dense relative to water, so they're going to sink through the water column and get to the sediments the day it's applied. So there's not going to be, it's not going to move out of the lake after it's applied. It's going to get down in the sediments and stay there.
In either case, liquid or the dry. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Janice?
I have two questions. One is, I think maybe your slide showed it. How many pounds are we talking about for the whole lake? Wasn't that like in the 7,000s?
Yeah, I utilized an estimate of 7,000, I think 275 for the mobile phosphorus that you'd need to target in the lake. I'm sure with the Herrera study you guys are doing, it'll be around there. And I'm sure my estimate and their estimate, it'll end up being pretty close to each other. The big thing is you want to at least be in the right ballpark. And as you do your management plan, when you do your follow-up sampling, you can really refine what that actual number is through time. Okay,
and then I'm also trying to just picture, I don't know what you call it, the mechanics of how this is working, because you mentioned that the lanthanum, either product, did not clear the water column on its way down.
Mm-hmm.
Background is we had heard a speaker on iron, and it apparently did clear the water column. Your products do not, but they end up at the bottom, and they're binding to the I don't know whether I should use the word phosphate or phosphate, but they bind. And then you said when P is released, it would also bind then. So I'm curious, is when it's released, how is it binding if it's not clearing the water column as it goes down?
Got you. As a lake operates, there's always a flux of phosphorus, or most of the time there's fluxes of phosphorus coming out of the sediments. An up arrow, and then with all the algae and stuff living in sediment particles, an algae dying, they're going to settle down to the lake bottom again. So kind of a downward arrow. So we're cutting off the upward arrow, and so there's going to be a net downward trend with phosphorus, and that's how you. Although you're not binding it in the water column, when you're talking about weeks and months after the application, you can see the phosphorus in the water column decrease because more of it's settling out than it's re-releasing back up.
I guess and maybe this is too technical, the P that's being released is somehow different than the P that's already in the water column? Because it's binding it, you're saying, when it's being released, but it's not binding it.
Yeah,
and they're both in the water column, so I'm a little confused as to.
Yeah, and this is where to have a long-term improvement of the lake, you don't need to bind all the phosphorus right when the product, that's in the water column when the product's applied.
Sure.
Because you've got this massive reservoir of phosphorus in the lake sediments.
Right.
And roughly about 10% of that releases of that phosphorus pool back up into the lake every summer. And phosphorus is constantly recycling between the water column and the sediment. So you can basically set a trap in the sediment and then catch things as they're cycling. Just like,
so are you actually
a mouse in your garage or something.
Are you actually saying that the lanthanum, though, is creating a barrier for the release as opposed to the phosphorus being released and then it catching it?
Yes, not a physical barrier like a rubber, like a tarp, but it is, attracted like magnets, essentially. So if there's a phosphorus available and it's next to a lanthanum ion or mineral, it's going to grab it and bind it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
So it's intercepting it.
Last question, Terry and Ken.
Sorry, had my mic on. You may have already said this, and I know you said target the deeper water, but in the overall picture of this, how close to the shore do you treat?
Yeah, it's there's just a very practical sense to this. Generally, we're not going to be treating inside the dock lines. But if you, considering the shallow sediments that you would eventually treat, that's still covering 95% of the lake area. So you don't need 100% nook and crannies, along, up to the shoreline. If you're getting 90 to 95% coverage of the lake, you're doing more than enough than what's needed.
And that would take care of the algae even along the shorelines then?
Well, when form from the end of the scroll.
Yeah, so, and I don't know how the other manufacturers will describe their products, but so EutroSORB in these chemistries, they have no toxic effects on algae. They're not pesticides. It's just that we're binding up phosphorus. We're changing the nutrient conditions in the lake. So the algae will respond to that change in nutrient conditions.
Okay.
So I can't say that there's a direct killing of algae.
Okay, I got a couple questions on the chat real quick. The question was, did the lake have mills on it? Yes, we did. Question is sometimes wood waste was discharged. Does the wood waste itself change the DOC or change the phosphorus?
Generally, wood is really hard to degrade and break down, so it's probably not going to release phosphorus.
Okay, yeah,
that it has in it.
Yeah, it's been since 1928, so it's been almost 100 years since that happened. So the other question was, there's oozes or seeps in the bottom of the lake. Yeah, there are, Bonnie, quite a few. We have springs in the lake, and that's one of the studies we have to do, is determine how much phosphorus is coming out of those springs. Another question was, does the iron in the dry product provide additional P sequestration? If so, is that part of the effectiveness of the product? Referring to the SI.
Yeah, in general, we're not really considering it as part of the, it probably has some, but it's generally being applied at a concentration of iron that's very similar to the iron already in the sediment. So it's not going to be a large amount of iron that's added. It's just a very small amount. It's a small percentage of the formulation.
Okay.
And not something we're trying to claim phosphorus binding capability for.
Our presenter tonight will be Ryan Van Gotham, luminologist and project lead for EutroPHIX, who will be talking to us about EutroSORB G and EutroSORB SI. Here is our contact information at Lake Lawrence. I'll give you a second. If you liked this presentation, please give us a thumbs up. Here are a few other videos you might find educational and interesting. And hit the subscribe button in the lower right corner to get automatic notifications when the new videos are posted to this YouTube channel. Hope you all have a great day.